The day the letter came in the post, I had been possessed by the strangest feeling of melancholy. There was no reason for it that I could think of, only a bout of the winter blues. It had been raining for 3 days solid after all. Now thinking back, what I'd been feeling was something more. Loneliness and isolation. It had been winter in more ways than just the weather. That was the reason, I think, that when I read the letter, it affected me the way it did. I hadn't thought of Aunt Tabitha in years, but the letter brought with it a flood of memories. I never understood as a child the distinction between Aunt Tabitha and a blood relative. All I knew was that she loved us like her own children. But after we moved away, after all that happened, the steady pulse of her memory seemed to fade away, as if she was literally fading from existence. When the letter arrived, I felt that pulse once more, weak and slow but persistent, felt it almost pulling at me like an undercurrent. Suddenly I was transported back to our childhood and the long summer days we would spend at Mortimer Hall. Widowmaker Hall, the locals cruelly called it, on account of the 2 husbands that Aunt Tabitha had lost to the same wasting disease. But as children we remained relatively untouched by these barbs as we played in our garden paradise. We used to pretend that we were adventurers getting lost in the gardens that appeared vast to a child's eye. They had a sort of cultivated wildness, something that old Frederick the gardener worked hard at. I remember him growing old before our eyes, seeming to take more and more support from his broom rather than using it. After he went, so suddenly and so frail, the gardens were never the same. Still we played while all along the house loomed, watching over the gardens and our activities like a sentinel. In the winter, that same house was our refuge. Aunt Tabitha had a playroom set out for us with toys and dolls, although I used to avoid the dolls and their blank, lingering stares. I felt their eyes boring into me as if the dolls were waiting expectantly for something, although I could never imagine what. The rest of the toys were a ragtag assortment, the kind of thing collected from jumble sales and passed on by friends and relatives, each with chipped paint or parts missing, and they were kept in battered suitcases. But we never stayed long in the playroom, with its dim light and condensation clouding the windows. Instead, during those winter days, we would run shrieking through the corridors, scaring each other witless, or lingering in the kitchen vying for leftover cake mixture. All the while, Aunt Tabitha seemed to relish our youthful abandon. We loved to play hide and seek in the house. I remember lying patient and watchful under Aunt Tabitha's huge canopy bed, clambering into the pantry of all the different smells or stifling sneezes in the attic. I always remember the attic, like a tomb for dead furniture, each piece in its dust-covered shroud. But we never went into the basement, under strict orders from Aunt Tabitha. I remember asking her, "What's in there then?" She replied, "Damp walls, cobwebs and draughts, an ill-fitting place for such a pretty young thing." Then she smiled and pinched my cheek. "You look so pretty I could eat you all up." But after Frederick died, that smile faded and she seemed gradually to withdraw, becoming distant. Often she would seem to answer when nobody spoke. I remember our parents speaking the dreaded word, dementia, that word so full of fear and sadness, and the day that Mum and Dad dragged us to the car as we begged and wailed. My last memory of Aunt Tabitha was of the house seeming to close in around her, old and frail in her wicker chair, muttering to some unseen tormentor as dementia took her. She looked so small, so alone. That's why I wrote you this letter, I don't know what condition I'll find her in, but I'm going down to Mortimer Hall. You never know, maybe my visit will lift her spirits a little. I'm sure a visit from you would do the same.